Now, months before recent protests and debate over historical statues, one of South London High School was already doing an experiment to see if racial bias could be spotted and eradicated in 11 and 12-year-olds.
Now, the results were filmed for a new documentary, which has proved very timely.
Well, we're joined by two of the participants, Mackay plus his grandfather Mike, and Farah is there with her dad Michael.
And we're also joined by Professor Rhiannon Turner from the Centre for Identity and Intergroup Relations at Queen's University Belfast, who is also part of this programme. So before we talk to the two children who are involved, Professor Turner, just tell us what the idea was behind this, what was trying to be achieved.
OK, well, really what we were trying to achieve through the programme was to try and tackle children's unconscious biases. So what I'm talking about there is the biases that we hold about minority groups without even realising it, but that can have subtly kind of negative effects on our behaviour. We were trying to do this really by building children's confidence in talking about issues of race and racism, because this is something that we know that children and indeed adults in society are really quite uncomfortable talking about. But by building that confidence and getting children to talk about these issues, we were hoping we could really address issues of systemic inequalities in society, really get children understanding about institutional racism and what that is, and that by discussing these issues together, they would actually come closer together and feel empowered to actually be able to make a difference potentially in the future to tackle some.
When you talk about subconscious or unconscious bias, I mean, these children were only, what, 11, 12 when you're talking to them. How do you think they're displaying that?
Well, we did an assessment of their unconscious bias at the start of the programme, the programme that will appear this evening, where we actually assessed it using a time reaction task called the implicit association test. And what we can see is that children have stronger associations between images of Black, Asian and minority ethnic children and negative characteristics, and then stronger associations between white images and more positive words. So we tend to show this pro-white bias. And this isn't something that's specific to these children. This is something that we tend to see among both children and adults in a majority white society like the UK.
OK, well, let's talk to Mackay and Farah then, because, of course, you were front and centre, both of you, weren't you, involved in this experiment. Mackay, what was it like for you?
It was a really fun experience, and I really enjoyed just being on TV normally.
Yeah.
You wouldn't like that. But, yeah, it was a really good experience, and I'm very proud to be a part of the show.
Had you or any of your friends, who maybe some of the white friends, ever talked about racial issues? Did this the sort of thing that came up in class or in the playground?
Not so much. Sometimes we did occasionally talk about it, but nowhere near as much depth as we did in the show.
And have you found, Mackay, that since doing the show and going through all of these challenges and experiments, that it's something that you're all more aware of and talk about more openly now?
Yeah, I think I understand where people are coming from, what they're trying to say, and I truly understand the meaning of don't judge a book by its cover.
And Farah, I wonder what the experience was like for you and your friends of different ethnicities.
Yeah, I think it helped because I'm a mixed race. I found it quite hard knowing which group I fitted into. So I think this project kind of helped me find my identity, I guess. And I think so the same with Mackay, it was never really something that came up in the playground. You just wouldn't talk about it, I guess. So I think it was a new thing for everyone to go through.
Michael, you are Farah's dad. I wonder, we saw in that sort of a little bit of video that we showed before we spoke to you, a number of the children obviously quite emotionally affected by this. These are very, very challenging issues for children of that age to have to deal with. Were you concerned about the effects this might have?
Yes, I think before we went into the process, we had sort of a number of concerns which we discussed with the production company. I think, as Professor Turner said, that race can be a profoundly difficult and uncomfortable thing, even for adults to discuss. So we wanted to make sure that, obviously, as far as well-being was paramount, So we had a number of discussions and a number of sessions throughout the recording of the show to ensure that took place. And I think, we were confident. We wanted to ensure that Farah had a great sort of enriching educational experience, but at the same time that there was, obviously proper support, and we felt comfortable that her well-being was being safeguarded.
And Mackay, your grandfather, Mike, is alongside you. Mike, I wonder if I can ask you about, we've talked about the fact that Black history, for instance, is not a core part of the curriculum. Is that something that you think is something that needs to be addressed in schools?
Absolutely. I think that this particular school were very brave in doing this programme. This was done at the time of Brexit, so there was a national conversation about division. And I think the current climate around Black Lives Matter and all the debates going on around the country, I think it's very, very important that this is done. And I think we can learn a lot from young people about how to live better as a country.
Mackay, what was it like when finally you all got brought back together and instead of being separated, you were back being in that class with all your mates from all different parts and all different heritages?
It was weird because we just split up and then we're just all back together all of a sudden. So for me, I was quite confused, like why we were doing this. But eventually, when it went on, I actually kind of understood why we did this and the impact it had on everyone.
And Professor Rhiannon Turner, the key thing needs to be to foster a sense of unity, doesn't it? Amongst all the children. I mean, some people will be concerned about seeing that little bit of video, and some children, quite emotionally sort of overwhelmed by what they're having to deal with, address. How did you make sure that this ends up not being a divisive exercise, but actually a unifying one?
Well, I think one of the purposes of having the affinity groups, where we did actually divide the children up into their different ethnic groups, was that because it's such an uncomfortable and difficult and challenging topic to talk about, actually by getting the children to become more comfortable talking about it within their own ethnic groups. For example, for the white children, they got the opportunity to talk about maybe some of their fears about coming across as racist, fears about what they could and couldn't ask or could and couldn't say. And then for the Black, Asian and minority ethnic children, getting the opportunity to really talk about their own experiences of racism and discrimination, but also all of the positive aspects of their culture that perhaps they don't always get to talk about because it's maybe not really covered in the curriculum. Providing them with those opportunities, although at times there were, as you say, uncomfortable moments where children did get upset. Actually, ultimately, when they came back together, they were much more confident in talking about those issues. So they really started to share with one another. And although these children, clearly they were previously friends and they played together in the playground and talked, they didn't talk about these really deeply important issues to them, these issues of identity. And if you're not talking about those issues, actually, it's really hard to form proper, meaningful friendships because there's a massive kind of elephant in the room, really, that you're not talking about. So actually, I think by dividing them, ultimately, it was a unifying process. And by the end of the series of activities that took place, without giving too much away, they really were, I think, much happier and more bonded and had gained a lot from the experience.
I hope so, yeah. OK, all right.
Farah, was that your experience as well? Because you're in the classroom and your white friends, I'm sure, are just as important to you of any friends, and I'm pretty sure that you probably didn't even notice before this experiment. Has everyone come back together and enjoys each other's company and has felt like the experiment has been a positive thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as a result, I think we've all become much closer. And I think that, everyone is more comfortable with each other, in general, because I think now that we've, as she said, addressed this big elephant in the room, now it's there's nothing really holding back. So I think now we can always talk about honest opinions without fear of being disrespectful.